Hey guys, welcome to 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And here's what I need you to do. Make sure you subscribe to the Volumes YouTube channel to stay up to date to everything we're doing here on 3 and Out and the Volume. Another thing that's not ideal, and listen, I have been very critical of Russell Wilson because I don't do fake and corny stuff well because I think it's all premeditated. I feel it's very political. I mean, I can't even imagine being a politician. One, you don't make that much money, even though you actually kind of do because you get to do all the shady shit and get put on boards. But you just constantly, your opinions, constantly changing. You actually don't have any conviction. You don't truly give a shit. Everything is just about what I have to do to get people to like me so they vote for me. Zero conviction. Like most of us in the real world, like we have conviction on things. And while our opinion, things might change, we're not just, as the wind goes, changing our thoughts, right? We have some, especially if you're got into sports, like you have some core values, those things stay with you. Like when I think you're a fraud or a phony, I feel like you don't really have any of those. And I think Russell sometimes when he talks, he just can sound very phony. Though, I will always, I do think Russell loves football. I do think it means everything to him. I do think he does everything humanly possible to be a great football player. He's not, he's never going to get in trouble. Like, I respect the player and I respect the person. I'm not very religious, but I was watching some of his Denver Broncos, and obviously when his dad passed away, it's been a huge moment. Like, my dad passed away. Anytime I have some shared experience with the guy. Like, I can relate to the power of that, right? And I do respect the player. I think he's a Hall of Fame level player. But as I've said over and over, I think he forced his way out of there. And basically over both press conferences yesterday, I watched Russell's and I watched Seattle's. And I watched Seattle and Pete be very, very defiant, be very, very stubborn. Well, guess what? Most guys that are 70 years old that have been making $15 million for a decade and have $100 million in the bank are going to be stubborn. But I do after watching Pete Carroll, who is not handling this well, who acted like you guys are crazy to think that we wouldn't trade Russell Wilson. Well, yeah, Pete, unless he's demanding that he leaves, which I don't necessarily think that he went like in black Sharpie on a whiteboard in Pete's office, you have to trade me. And even they kind of admitted it was just kind of known. He wasn't going to sign an extension. It was probably time to move on. But listen, for as much as Russell wanted a new opportunity, and I'm pro new opportunities, I think it's very, very healthy. I think seeing new people, being around new people, new ideas is healthy for all of us, right? Anyone that's ever changed jobs knows that it's, I would say, motivating's probably the wrong word, but invigorating. It just adds some juice to your life, something new professionally. It can be very, very healthy. And watching Pete Carroll, who's not into new, who's into doing it how I've done it, I get where Russell Wilson's coming from. So while I still don't love, they ask him the legacy he wants to lead. He says he's going to want to win 4 more Super Bowls. There's a cheesiness to him that doesn't vibe with me. There is a star football player that I'd want on my team that vibes with me. And watching Pete Carroll, I understand I wouldn't want to be around Pete Carroll anymore if I was him too. Because I think there's a phony element to Pete Carroll. I think there's an element of like, Pete, do you even realize the way you sound right now? You guys are claiming that you like Drew Lock coming out of college. I would not be admitting that right now. You just traded Russell Wilson. Nobody on God's green earth that supports your football team wants you to blow Drew Lock in front of all of us. We don't believe he's any good. Ultimately, you traded Russell Wilson. And if Russell Wilson is just solid, you're going to lose the trade. You're also 70 years old. Like, I honestly think Seattle's going to suck next year. I think they're going to be terrible. And ultimately, did this breakup have to happen? I understand why Russell wanted a breakup. After watching Pete, I would have wanted a breakup too. I'm coming around. I get it. Now, watching the Broncos, I'm rooting for Nathaniel Hackett, bald guy. There is no lock that he's any good. You would say historically, new coaches, probably under 50% that he's going to be any good. Now, he's inheriting a lot of talented players, and he gets to coach Russell Wilson. So he does get some advantages. But ultimately, he's a first-time head coach who's also going to be calling plays. There's going to be a lot going on. I think that Denver, obviously, I mean, they probably should be a playoff team. Seattle is in major shambles. And honestly, their press conference was embarrassing. It really was. It was, the whole thing. Like, they kept talking about, like, their philosophies and the guys on the team. It's like, guys, the only thing anyone cares about is Russell Wilson. Why did this happen? And I could see Russell Wilson was just tired of being around Pete. And Pete even mentioned this, like in college, guys are gone every 4 or 5 years. We're in the NFL, like, let's face it. Richard Sherman, Bobby Wagner, now Russell Wilson, like, they keep having bad breakups with Pete Carroll. You know who doesn't have bad breakups? Andy. Andy breaks up with a lot of players. Feels pretty normal. Kyle Shanahan's now broken up with several players. Feels pretty normal. Sean McVay's broken up with some players. Feels pretty normal. A lot of these guys keep signing free agent contracts. They all value him. Not quite the way it feels in Seattle. Because this lovey-dovey, we're all best friends, competing everyone. Pete, you're a stone cold killer. You'll cut anybody. You literally have. Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, traded just I think he puts on this smile face so he can avoid being talked about like he's Belichick. And I'm not saying he's Belichick the coach. I just mean the way he thinks about football. So watching Pete Carroll, man, I gravitated toward Russell's side. I really did. A couple moves I wanted to talk about. One was really impressive and one I really questioned. For a long period of time, and they earned this, the Raiders were a joke. Al Davis's latter years after he traded John Gruden to the first several years of Mark Davis, they were a complete embarrassment. They just did dumb shit. They didn't win any games, and they just felt overmatched for the rest of the league. And then Del Rio kind of just stabilized them a little bit, but they still kind of had some Raider vibes to them. And then they got John Gruden, which felt like going to take them to the next level. And the reality of the John Gruden hire is it's one of the most underwhelming things we've ever witnessed because of the hype behind John Gruden. We thought he was going to come in, just kick ass, take names, dominate. That didn't even come close to happening. And then he gets fired. And then ultimately they made the playoffs. But Mark Davis somehow was convinced the guy, and Josh McDaniels put on some LBs over the years, looks a little different, but get Josh McDaniels out of New England with his guy Ziegler, also from New England, and build like Pats with the Raiders. And as we've seen, I've said this over and over, like I even talked to a buddy recently that's like, man, I heard some stories about Brian Flores at the Combine. Not good. Said over and over. Treated people like assholes. Matt Patricia. People couldn't stand the guy. Joe Judge, I don't have much inside information the way he treated people, but he was just a terrible coach. But like a lot of the Belichick guys are just overwhelmed, are just mean. They try to be something they're not. And maybe Josh, just because of the separation now from the Denver period, and he brings this guy that he's known since high school, just are a little more stable and have some more perspective and are not out to prove themselves all or nothing every day. Like it's kind of a slow and steady race. Well, they made a move, actually several moves, that was like, that's just a high-level chess game that John Gruden and Mayock were not doing. You know why? Because I kept saying in the John Gruden era, his biggest downfall was not understanding value. Like, bro, you don't need to draft that guy at 5th overall. You could get him at 24. You don't need to draft Leatherwood at 17. You could have got him at 35. Like, this is there's the game that's played on the field, and there's the game that's played off the field. And honestly, John Gruden on the field wasn't that terrible. Off the field, embarrassment. Signing free agents early in the draft. Hit on some late round picks, him and Mayock, but you make your money early in the draft, especially when you're drafting high. And I watched Ziegler and Josh come in and do this. Yannick Ngakoue was never going to play a snap for the Raiders. He does not play the run, and think about the Raiders like the Patriots. Doesn't play the run, and is kind of a reckless pass rusher. So they flip him, and they sign Chandler Jones and get the corner Rock Ya-Sin, who was once a really high pick. So they get Chandler Jones, who is a superior player to Yannick, who they know because they were around in New England and can play the run. And then they get this corner who they would have cut Yannick. They would have got rid of him. But they get this corner who has not played well. But I like taking flyers on guys that were drafted high, especially at positions like corner, wide receiver, guard, center, and maybe you can resurrect them. So that is the type chess moves that would never have been played the last 4 or 5 years on the Gruden watch. And I don't know how Josh is going to be as a head coach, but in terms of just running an operation, him and Ziegler, hat tip, very impressive little operation. A move that I don't necessarily hate, but I think was pretty bold. I am all for, and we're going to talk about the Rams in a second, say this all the time, being aggressive. Windows are short in the NFL. Guys get injured. When you have the opportunity to compete for Super Bowls, put all your chips in the middle of the table. Take big swings. Look at the Chargers. Went after Khalil, signed J.C. Jackson. Why? Their window is now. They have this young rookie quarterback who's on a cheap deal. Well, the Bills have paid their quarterback, but their window is now. They're right there. They were 13 seconds away from being in the AFC Championship game, hosting the AFC Championship game, probably beat the Bengals and would have been in the Super Bowl. Hell, they might be Super Bowl champs, and they know it. So they're just a couple pieces away. Most teams are not a piece away. For a long period of time, those Brady-Belichick teams were always like a piece or two away. It's always why they'd go get a Revis. They'd go get, whoever, right? The Bills probably feel we're a piece away. And because of Buffalo, I don't know if it's regionally they had to overpay, but I'm all for them going to get a Von Miller, a Chandler Jones, being in that market of getting a sweet defensive pass rusher behind it. Paying Von Miller $51 million guaranteed, though, is pretty insane. Now, a huge part of free agency is supply-demand. Market value is driven up by multiple people wanting you, right? If you're worth $500 and two people want, or let's just say this. You have something that's worth $500. Well, if one person wants it and he's willing to pay $500, the price is $500. Well, if two people want it and someone's like, well, I'll give you $575, and the other guy goes, well, I'll give you $625. Obviously, it just starts going up. No different in free agency. So multiple people wanted Von Miller. His price went up. And let's face it, Von Miller should send a thank you letter to Les Snead and Sean McVay, because if Von Miller's season would have ended with the Denver Broncos, he's probably getting half of what he got. But instead, he went to the Rams, was getting like a sack a game in the playoffs. Everyone's watching these playoff games, and his value went up because he is an all-time great player. But he's also going to be 33 years old, and they gave him $55 million. So now, when you're already investing this much into your starting quarterback, anything less than him being like a pseudo Pro Bowler and being healthy for your stretch run is a disaster. To me, the risk is really, really high. It really is. And this is a guy, major injury, tore his ACL once upon a time, and then 2 years ago had the major injury that knocked him out for the season. So you're getting an older player who has been multiple major injuries. I get the philosophy, and I appreciate the willingness to take the swing. I just think the risk level on this one's pretty high. Because when you $20 to $30 million guaranteed, no issue with those price points. Once you start getting $50, $60 million price points of guaranteed money, that's what high-end guys get paid on their own team to get extended, that never hit free agency. That's what the sweet players get to get extended. I think the risk there is, if he's healthy, it'll be awesome. And you could be like, John, couldn't you say that about every guy? Well, yeah, but when you sign a guy that's 27 years old or 28 years old, you feel a little bit better about his health than a guy, well over 30. So Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, all in on Von Miller. Now, part of it is the leadership, the resume. He brings a lot to the table. But so did J.J. Watt last year, and I think he only got $22 million guaranteed. The other thing is the L.A. Rams. As someone that just follows the 49ers closely and is like, what the hell are we doing with Jimmy Garoppolo here? You could have used that cap space to go sign Chandler Jones. Like, let's take some swings here. Because, again, the time is now. No team, and I repeat, no team is more aggressive than the LA Rams. All of a sudden, you just look up and Allen Robinson, who is like, a lesser Keenan Allen, but 2 years ago, in 2019 and 2020, playing with Mitch Trubisky, caught 200 balls and 13 touchdowns. Guy can play. And you put him with Matt Stafford and now Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee and Akers will be healthy. That offense is prolific. That offense is going to be, they're going nowhere. And I think two teams, there were some reports about the one thing Tom Brady did the moment he resigned was basically become their number one recruiter. You know, the Tampa and LA are just operating like nothing less than a Super Bowl matters. They're operating like they're the LA Dodgers or the New York Yankees. And I appreciate that. And you can tell me, well, it doesn't always work. Well, it's working for those two teams because they've won the last two fucking Super Bowls. So, like, to me, like, we got to change. The prudent Bill Belichick philosophies that a lot of teams operate, you know, it's one thing when you got Tom Brady. No one else will ever have a Tom Brady again. Tampa never will either once he retires. So you got, like, this new modern-day NFL. And listen, I'm not random free agents, just give them a bunch of money. But specific guys who you know can make an impact, quote-unquote, overpay a little bit, is a good philosophy. That works. Because I don't care how many draft picks you have. We already know the hit rate on draft picks is 50-50 at best. If you have 8 draft picks and 4 of them turn out to be good players, one's a Pro Bowler and the other 3 are starters, that's a hell of a draft. That draft is an outlier. Most drafts, you get like 2 starters. So the way these teams are operating, getting guys that you know that can play, that you know that can produce, and it's back to the Bills thing. Like, my only issue was the amount of money, not that they acquired Von Miller, right? Chandler Jones, Yannick, I don't know if Rock, I haven't studied cornerback play. He clearly is an underachiever. But all these guys can play. Now, depending on the scheme and what you need them to do. But I know. Like, I don't know. Kayvon Thibodeau might be a great player. Might be a bust. We have no... Aiden Hutchinson. I talked to a buddy the other day that's like, you know, I think he might be a little overrated. You never know. Tua was can't miss until we watched him play, and now he's a miss. You know, or at least average at best, especially relative to the guy they passed on him for. I would, if I owned a team, I would tell my GM, let's go after guys that we know about. Guys that we know in the NFL. Be aggressive. Now, don't be reckless, but be aggressive. Look, Rams, target Allen Robinson. The Eagles, target Hassan Reddick. Like, you just find specific players and put all your chips in the middle of the table, and you know that that's a plug-and-play guy. I like that philosophy. I wish more teams would do that are good. I think some teams, now if you don't have money, like you don't have money. Chiefs don't have any cash. Cowboys are clearly experiencing what happens when you overpay guys. Like they're overpaid Zeke, overpaid Dak. Like you got to cut players and cut Amari and trade Amari Cooper and cut Lyle Collins and, you know, you can't re-sign Randy Gregory. Like that's what happens when you pay a bunch of guys a lot of money. When you pay great players, like do I love paying $80 million total to Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams? Like, yeah, it's probably a tough pill to swallow. But at least they're Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams. So I know every time I step on the field, I have the 2 best players on the field. So, free agency, man. It's just not many great players, but the few, I just don't think enough teams were all over. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.